not to be controversial.
But to be controversial.
Black is white.
Yeah.
And if you don't agree with me, you are causing my mental health problems. You know, and so then you get kind of lunacy. Mm. You have a tiny, small minority governing the majority.
Yeah.
And that is what happened. I mean, then they gain slowly they gain ground and they gain power. And suddenly you're saying, yes, you're right, black is white. You see, and you're completely programmed. And if you say anything against it, there can't be any debate. Because if you say, well, I think you're mentally unstable, you immediately get slapped down. You're either a bic, a phobe, or an ism, don't you? Straight away. You're that. You're that. Oh, well, you can't. And these made-up words. Completely bic, ism, phobic. Yeah. You know, and you can't. I'm terribly sorry. No, you're cancelled. You're finished. You can't. Free speech, don't give me that. You've importuned my mental health. Forget it. You're cancelled. So we go around going, oh, I can't possibly say that, you know. And I used to say on the set, for example, because suddenly I did a production of some television show. And the first year, it was just to go further with this hypocrisy we're talking about. The first year it was, look, get your clothes off. And this poor, extra supporting player, sorry, you can't say extra anymore, supporting player, you're importuning their mental health. And you go, he goes, what, completely naked? Yes, get your clothes off, come on. And you, this poor woman there, and I'm terribly sorry, it's a scene in a brothel or something, and I'm there being all lascivious and corrupt, I don't know. Anyway, so that happened, and then there's the girl, and she's having to take her clothes off, completely stark, as, full frontal nudity, and I'm all there, kind of like twisting my moustache or whatever it was. The next year, it was in the off-season, so between season 1 and season 2, Me Too happened. Like that, Weinstein, and my God, we got to do this. Well, I went on set the second year, and there was intimacy coordinators, there were signs up everywhere, if you're like this. Utter hypocrisy. The year before, it's get your bloody clothes off, what are you doing? Treated like cattle. And then the year after, it's like, excuse me, we know this is going to be difficult, but would you mind if, and there was this girl, she complained. She went off to Paris or something, left us all waiting because he'd shown too much of her side breast when she'd had an entire scene full frontally naked. And you think, my God, the hypocrisy. But you couldn't say anything. You see, everything had been sanitized and everybody had been shocked. My God, it took them nearly 100 years to find out about the casting couch, in the entertainment business.
What's the casting couch?
Casting couch, well, you do this for me and you'll get the role, sort of thing. I myself haven't suffered from that. Goodness knows why. There's a lot. Yes. Anyway, that's another story. But it is extraordinary how suddenly society gets all up in arms, and it does basically come down to that fundamental hypocrisy, and you can't point it out to them. I mean, we've had it recently, haven't we, with the politicians being told. Can you imagine being told about biological fact like this? I'm not going to be too controversial, but I was very, very. I don't know much about biology. I never studied it apart from the basics, and it just struck me as hilarious that it took the Supreme Court to turn around and say, well, this is what defines a woman and this is what defines a man, like that, and that's the law. And then suddenly all the politicians going, yeah, oh, right, yes, well, yeah, you can't do that anymore. And I just thought, well, bloody hell, did we really need that? Because, again, we're talking about, in humanity, a tiny proportion, insisting upon something that is not true, in order to change the views of the majority. Like that. And so I think this is a rich seam of thought that we're onto here, and how easily people are programmed. So out of fear.
Yeah, I mean, this ties a nice bow on the 2 points that we've got here of that sort of you are pushed into line, and you're pushed with fear.
Absolutely. And coming back to responsibility, I remember that incredible series, The World at War, and there was a German woman, well, she was, I think, married a German. She was English, and a Jewish couple said, could you help us? And her neighbour said, you can't possibly help them. You cannot, because your entire family will be sent to a concentration camp. And she said, well, for one night you can stay. And in the morning they'd gone. Everything was neat. They'd gone and thanked her for the one night. They were arrested at the railway station and sent to Auschwitz. And she suddenly turned around and she said, I realized at that moment that Hitler had made me complicit made me a murderer.
Yeah, it calls back to that regime that oversees so much evil without getting its hands dirty.
Exactly. Exactly, yes.
I'd like to just we've touched the shore there, and I think we should venture into the mainland. Do you think freedom of speech exists in the Western world, or let's make it
throw us a bone, Tom?
Let's make it more particular. Do you think it exists in England?
Well, I know that it's under great threat, I think. That saddens me, because I look back at England. I mean, we live in the Kent countryside, and this is England to me. It's kind of merry England. Now, merry England probably never existed. It's in your mind. So I'm out walking with the dog and the Spitfire flies over. And funnily enough, I was learning the famous Churchill speeches before the documentary. And, I was, you shall fight on the beaches and all that. And the Spitfire was flying over. And I just thought, this is England. It's a kind of dream. Perhaps it never existed, but merry England does exist. I see it every day. It's here. Then I see it being corrupted and it being changed, and that culture is under threat. That you're told you can't say this or you can't say that, and that you're seeing divisions in law, which strike me as frankly terrifying. And I don't think, in my 51 years now, which have not been entirely uneventful, I don't see a time where I've been so anxious about where the country is. And I think it perhaps might come down to that I don't see effective leadership. I really don't see it at all. And that I don't see much difference between the major parties at all. It's almost as though they've lost their identity. And there is nobody saying, no, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. Remember all those speeches of Winston's, he didn't, Hitler was, ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer, like that, and the crowd were whipped into a frenzy. And he'd taken over the entirety of Europe. And we've got Winston very quietly saying on the radio, we shall fight them in the hills and in the streets. And the only time he emphasizes, we shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this country, a large part of it, was subjugated and starving, then the new world, with all its might and power, will come to the rescue of the old. And it's quiet, it's considered. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And people, you see the black and white footage of people at the pub, the only wireless in the village, and they're all listening. And when I was a little boy, my beloved grandparents, they'd won some records at Butlins called The March of Time. And you had all these voices on it, including this Churchill's. I remember hearing the siren wail, for the Blitz. this recording of this and the sound of explosions. My grandfather's riding a bike through Manchester. I think he had a pump to put out incendiary bombs and a bucket of water, a bucket of sand, going into burning buildings. They just got on with it. This extraordinary generation, willing to give their lives for their country and their culture and what they believed. Do you have that anymore?
Well, I'm glad you've said that, actually, because on the point of a certain Douglas Murray that was brought into the equation earlier...
Remarkable man.
Interesting character. He spoke of the fact he was looking at... There's some statistics that he brought up when he was talking to Chris Williamson of the fact that close to... I'm not sure on the exact measurement here, but close to half of English youth would, if they were put into a position where they needed or enlisted, that they would refuse. Now, I thought about this. I've paid quite a lot of attention to this, actually. From my own perspective, I would feel a sense of obligation to answer that call. Now, you can't quote me. You cannot draw from fact on this, because fortunately, I'm not being pressed to make my decision to make my decision known. But when I thought about it, I thought I can totally understand. One could argue that potentially the decision from a lot of people is stemming from a form of weakness, which is totally understandable in the midst of war. But what are we fighting for? If you were someone that was ordered to go and put your head on the chopping block, what would you be getting out of that? I think there's such an absence of pride and sort of pride, patriotism. And I think you're absolutely right on the question of whether freedom of speech is still something that we can fly the flag for. It is that lack
Well, there's no debate, is there? As I said, going back to, if debate is cancelled completely because you're immediately an ick, a phobe or an ism, and you're labelled and you're cancelled, that's the end of the argument, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very strong force for oppression.
Well, quite.
I mean, it's really, when we put it into black and white terms, the act of saying, what you've just said is not what I agree with, so as a result I'm going to totally demolish your livelihood, is not that dissimilar to some of the most despotic regimes we have ever seen.
Absolutely. Or this thing of you look at Middle England, the people that don't have a voice. We don't have a voice. We don't, but every 5 years we're given a ballot paper and we go and vote. And that's when Middle England gets its chance to speak.
Your collective voice.
But if the debate is silenced by basically labelling them all far right, or lunatic left, or all these, again, this apparatus to stop the debate, to cancel the debate, that is incredibly concerning. It really, really is. And it's fracturing society. You can see that, and Middle England sees that. There's been a seismic shift just in these local council elections we've just had, May 1st, 2025. Suddenly this unknown party that had a few members a few years ago, and didn't exist, suddenly it's basically won the election. It's a massive seismic political shift. And you just have a look at the mainstream media and how they report it.
How do they report it?
Well, don't you?
Everybody
knows it's either not reported or you get say, yes, well, we're going to have to go harder and faster or something like that. It's quick. It's very disappointing, and all this. But suddenly, Middle England speaks and says, well, you're not calling us this and you're not labelling us that. Well, if you don't like it, we'll go for these people. Well, it's very disappointing. We have to fight to get the trust back. I turned up and I got the ballot paper and I looked at it. I went, now, who do I vote for? The people who caused the mess or the people who are making it worse? And the lady laughed, which is why I did it. And I said, I don't have a clue. And so I said, and how's the turnout? And she said, it was very quiet. She said, we expect about 10%. And it just struck me as I walked off, having done my duty and having had my say, like that, it suddenly struck me, well, my great-grandfather died in mud and slime and torture at Passchendaele, at the Third Battle of Ypres, October 4th, 1917. And he was 36 years of age, 2 young children at home, a wife that could barely support them. His body was never found, or he was never identified. He was probably taken to Tyncott. And you see on thousands and thousands of beautifully kept white, the Commonwealth war graves, white stone, a Seaforth Highlander of the Great War. Was that him? Is that him? Or is he at Westminster? Is he the unknown soldier? But he is unknown, no known grave. And he was a police constable in Manchester. He was from Dalbeattie in Scotland. But for some reason, he ended up in Manchester, where I'm from. And he was a policeman there. And so he was doing a reserved occupation. But women stopped him on the street and said, what are you doing, eh? You're not fighting with our soldiers. Gave him white feathers for cowardice. So he went and he was mown down, you know. General Haig's latest plan to move his drinks cabinet 6 inches closer to Berlin, all that. And thousands and thousands slaughtered. But what was he fighting for? He was fighting for all the fundamental freedoms we are enjoying currently and that are under threat. Undoubtedly. And that incredible generation is the greatest generation Britain's ever had. In the Second World War, what were they fighting for? You see them now, these old men who have shown a heroism that we can no longer comprehend. And I was filming near Prague, and I was in this huge hunting lodge, which used to belong to Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke, who was shot by Gavrilo Princip, you know, which commenced the World War I. And in this, oh my God, he slaughtered everywhere. There were antlers, deer antlers. I mean, this man, there was the Holocaust there of deer, you know, everywhere there were antlers. And in this grand room, there was this tiny little cabinet, and there was a blood-soaked white tunic, and a tiny bullet, and it said, "The bullet that changed the world." That was Gavrilo Princip's bullet. And I suddenly said to the actress I was working with, do you know, without that bullet, I wouldn't be here. Because my great-grandfather wouldn't have gone off to war. He wouldn't have allowed his daughter, my beloved Nana, to marry a boy from Salford, plumber. You kidding me? Oh, dear, how common. No, he wouldn't have allowed that. So my mother wouldn't have been here, and I wouldn't have been here, and without that bullet. And everybody can do it. That's why it's so fascinating.
The domino effect is a very interesting
Yes,
thing,
absolutely incredible. And she worked it out. She said, oh, I wouldn't have been here because we'd have never moved from, you know, and all that. I've gone off at a tangent. Where were we?
To be the way.
We were talking about England. Yes,
about
and so I have to relate it to that, as you look into what your forebears did. You know, remember that famous poster, "What did you do during the war, Daddy?" So there's all that propaganda. And you look at our recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you had that professionalism of the British Army. God knows why. When you saw them leave Basra and Afghanistan, that's another issue. And then the Taliban moved back 5 minutes later, you know, and now I believe recently their latest idea, they're on Twitter, aren't they, or whatever it's called?
The Taliban.
Yes, the Taliban. The Taliban. Yeah. But if you say something like, I don't agree with the murder of 3 young children, you're in prison, all that.
Because it's an outrageous perspective, obviously.
Well, quite. No doubt the Taliban won't allow women to walk in parks.
It's not remotely surprising. They're not allowed to walk in front of men. So
no. And you were talking about Hamas. So they voted Hamas in, the Palestinians. And then with the money in aid, it made their leaders billionaires, and they were living in Qatar and places like that, Dubai.
Saudi Arabia.
Yes. While they're building an infrastructure under Palestine, under Gaza, that is bigger than the London Underground.
With billions of pounds that was given to them by foreign aid.
By all these aid organisations.
For this aid.
In order to build infrastructure under schools and hospitals. Now, in any form of intelligence, that is using children or the sick and dying as human shields.
You don't even have to sort of make the point of the by proxy way of doing it there. They literally do this. They put the barrels of their weapons on the shoulders of their women and march them forward.
Yes, and people want to march for that every week.
Flying the homosexual flag.
And saying, death to the Jews, from the river to the sea, not knowing. There was a girl, I'm marching here for a free Palestine, that's what I'm doing, like this. And they said to her, well, do you know what the river, from the river to the sea means? Yeah, it's from the river to the sea. All Palestine should be free. And you go, yeah, but do you know what it means? It means genocide. It means wiping the Jews out again, sending them away from their homeland again. Does it really? Well, it was theirs first. No, it wasn't. So what are you combating? We're back to how people are infiltrated and the nonsensical, command. Then it brings us on to religion, doesn't it? And is there anything that has caused more wars in the history of the world than religion?
Statistically, no.
No.
There's. No. I was speaking to a friend of mine about this. I made that exact point, and he said.
So I'm just warming up now. I'm going to be cancelled by midday.
We're in for it.
I don't care. I never did. Actually, you do care. That's why we're talking about this.
Yeah. You do care, but you don't care. My friend was saying, he said that there's less than 10% of warfare over history could be directly attributed to religion. And I said to him, how much of it would be directly attributed to the acquisition of land? And he said something like 80%. And I said, well, there you go. Because the taking land from someone would almost always have a religious narrative to it. It is imposing your beliefs, and those beliefs would so reliably be embedded in religious doctrine.
It's a very, very good way to control an empire.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that Constantine took Christianity as a rather good rule book, and the fundamental thing of forgive them, for they know not what they do. I think as we've become secular, that has caused a schism in our society and in our culture. There's the church that for 1,000 years, I go every day to it, and I'm not religious, but that church calls me. And I look at that path, and for 1,000 years, people walked up that path to be baptized, to take communion, to be married, to be buried. 1,000 years of our history and our culture, and now it's disused, and it's looked after by the English Church Conservation Trust. And it's there, and it's suspended in time, not T.S. Eliot, between pole and tropic. It's there. And I look at the hall that is an acquisition of I think, some very rich people. And it's suspended in time. The window has been broken. They spent millions on the roof, taking it off the danger list, restoring the Elizabethan chimneys. We're talking millions of pounds. But the broken window is still there 6 years later. And it's there. And one of our great historians, Sir Roger Twisden, lived there. And Cromwell sent parliamentary troops to arrest him there and bring him back to Parliament. And there's all that history there, and there's the path up to the church, which for 500 years, that was the connection between the hall and the church. And it's so rich in our culture and in our history. One of the most beautiful depictions of the Agnus Dei is there in stained glass. Now, I found out that a doodlebug or a V2, perhaps a V2, it was 27th of July 1944, blew in all the medieval stained glass. And there's just little bits of it. And it's just a thing of absolute beauty. And it's there, suspended in time. And I don't know what it is about it, but it calls me. It's Merry England. It's England. It's our home, our traditions, our history, our culture, everything. And it profoundly moves me. Would I fight for that? Yes.
That's a good point.
Yes, I'd be pretty bloody useless, but I can fire a gun. And would I take somebody's life that who probably, but that I disagree with? You know, that I fundamentally disagree with. Would I do that? Yes.
Why?
Because it's for England. And Winston's got me, hasn't he? He's got it in my head.
Yeah.
I know what I'm fighting to defend. Now, that percentage of children, you know, I mean, it would do them a lot of them an awful lot of good to go into the services, and the way the British Army's run, I mean, it's incredible. I remember being, funnily enough, the Churchill. They have this Churchill Society thing, and I went to Kansas City, and they had some of Winston's old regiment, the Hussars, and these young lads, impeccable in their manners, and all great drinkers, you know. Or they could have great fun, but they had this extraordinary service and presentation. They were representing their regiment and their pride. And I thought, well, if that's the generation that are looking after, that are defending us, we're all right. We're still all right, because it's ingrained. It's much maligned, and I think it should be greatly, greatly encouraged, you know.
I agree. Totally agree.
I really do. Yeah.
I think one of the most wicked tricks that has been played in recent years is the misinterpretation or the misinterpreting of pride in your nation as racism. Or
yes, yes. Well, you have. I've seen occasionally race baiters. You know, the people that want to pull down statues of our history, the people who want to claim that the British Empire was just evil and thoroughly evil and didn't do anything, you know.
I'm going to interject just quickly because I think there's an interesting point I think you can run with. Do you like Ricky Gervais?
Immensely.
Yeah.
I think he's incredibly clever. I don't know how he gets away with it, but, you know, I like a drink as much as the next man. Unless the next man's Mel Gibson, ladies and gentlemen. It's just incredible.
He is great.
He's a wonderful genius, you know, in the great traditions of our humour. And, you know, now they put warnings on and everything. You know, shows that I loved in the 1970s, a carry-on film.
Yeah.
You couldn't get more innocent than a carry-on film, but now it comes with a 3-page warning. Yeah. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Ricky Gervais is a paragon of positivity when it comes to challenging this sort of potential absence of freedom of speech. But he had a great point talking about exactly that. He was saying about people ripping down statues of eminent figures across history, and he says, rip statue down, throw it into the river. He said, what, the river that the statue, the whoever it is that's been thrown in the river that he built, or or you make a point of.
Was that Coulson in Bristol?
I don't quite possibly.
Yes, probably.
Well, he said, well, what about the hospitals that he built? Should we rip those down as well? He said, and they said, no, leave them. And he said, well, in which case, what's the point? Yeah. He had quite a funny little quip he said about just add an extra plaque to them, say philanthropist, historian, bit racist.
Bit racist.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, do you remember they desecrated Churchill's statue, that Churchill is a racist?
Yeah.
And the narrative, if you see online any kind of documentary or film about Churchill, they keep talking about the Bengal famine.
Yes, and Dresden.
Yeah, and Dresden, of course. And they completely forget the time of war, and they completely forget that the Bengal famine was caused by a cyclone. So you ask the question, well, was Churchill responsible for an act of nature? What? Well, thunderstorm, famine, that sort of thing. Was he responsible for that? Well, obviously not. No, cyclone. He wasn't God. He was fighting the Second World War. And was he responsible for Axis submarine plans during the Second World War? And you go, well, obviously not. That's the Italians, the Japanese, and the Germans. Well, all the relief he sent was torpedoed. Thousands of tons of grain. Well, it was done that. But they get on their high horse and they say, no, he's absolutely responsible for that. This is one of my favourite quotations. And it's by Cocteau. And it's about myth and history. And he preferred mythology to history, because history starts with the truth and ends in a lie, whereas mythology starts with the lie and ends in the truth. And so when the narrative, and there's a concerted narrative to almost cancel Churchill and the cult of Churchill, and they can't quite get him, because Middle England still revere him and his achievement.
As they should.
And, well, we will be talking German, Sprachen Sie Deutsch?
Which I'd have a serious problem with.
Nein? Nein?
Do you know, Douglas Murray and did you watch Douglas Murray and Dave Smith's podcast on Rogan?
I don't think I have seen that, no. I heard about it, though.
Yeah. Well, you would have done. I shall paraphrase and sort of add a bit of context here as to get into the point that I'd like to go into. Dave Smith is a comedian. He has his own vested interests in history and has a podcast in which he espouses his beliefs on the Israel-Hamas conflict or the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, as well as some threads on World War II.
What is his take on Israel and Hamas?
We shall get there.
Yeah?
We shall get there. And Douglas Murray was brought on essentially to oppose the narrative that Dave Smith is pushing forth with his beliefs, that Douglas Murray's perspective, which I think is totally right, is if you are not sort of credited with a level of profession or just genuine sort of a hands-on experience on something, then you can comment on that, but you need to be very careful how you do that. Because if someone, for instance,
it's not stopped us today.
Well, yeah, with all due fairness, the first comment you made as we got into this was, "I'm not a professional," or "I'm not an expert." Were your words. So that is, you have sort of safeguarded that point. I think Douglas Murray's point was, it's not that you cannot comment on these acts, but someone like Dave Smith is really jumping on the bandwagon when it comes to being anti-Israel and
I think I saw a bit of this. Is this when he turned round and said to him, "Have you been to the crossings?"
Yes, yeah.
Is this the one?
Yeah.
And the guy said, "No."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, I have.
Yeah.
I've seen it with my own eyes." Well, you can't argue against that, can you?
Yeah, and
really?
this was his point, and I do.
So he's anti-Israel.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you could say he's anti-Israel, but he's certainly got opposing views towards Israel. And Douglas Murray didn't, in my humble opinion, convey his point very well, because he was so irritated, which is totally understandable.
Wow, he never usually loses his cool.
He was very, very irritated. And I think it was lost in translation that essentially what Douglas was trying to say is, it's not that you can't comment on these matters, but when you seem to be purposefully choosing the sort of obviously, even sort of constructed way of being sort of argumentative, making the point against what Israel have done, essentially for the sake of making the point. Douglas Murray was saying that is dangerous when you've got such an eminent platform to be saying things like that, and then all of a sudden hide behind, "Oh well, I'm not actually credited with this. This is just my opinions." I think it's an interesting point on that, because I think, as I say, Douglas Murray sort of came across in the podcast as though he was by no means anti-freedom of speech, but certainly working against some of the sentiments of freedom of speech.
I think perhaps, if I may speak, if I may speak for Douglas Murray, I think perhaps his point would have been anti-ignorance.
Yeah, and that's the point. And this is where I'd like to tie it in with Churchill, is people, as you say, people can't seem to quite get Churchill in terms of abolishing his legendary status that he's totally earned. People can't get him because they can't seem to... It's quite a big... The bulwark of... I was one of the figureheads of stopping two of the most wicked and malevolent belief systems history has ever known. That's quite a big accolade. And I totally understand people's perspective when they make comments on, for instance, something like Dresden. But I don't know. I think my point I would like to make here... They
will reap the whirlwind. This is what he said. You know, they will reap the whirlwind.
What does that mean?
Because after the Blitz, Coventry, Bristol, Manchester, Liverpool, they bombed England ridiculously. I think at that point in the war, and he said it himself, it was absolutely too much. Previously, it was Hamburg, where there was a firestorm created, and that's what happened in Dresden. But it was requested by the Soviets, by Stalin, because after the failure of the Ardennes offensive in the winter of '44, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler was sending troops from the Western Front. He was giving that up to fight the Russians. And they were going through Dresden. And so that's why Dresden was targeted. And yes, Churchill was very, very uneasy about that kind of firepower at that stage in the war. But... When was Dresden? Dresden was 44, wasn't it? Late 44? I'm not sure. Do you want me to look? Yeah, yes, yeah. Or was it early 45? I know. It was right at the end. Yeah. So I perhaps early 45, but I don't. You've caught me out there. I should have read that before coming here this morning. Yeah, Douglas Murray might have a problem with you. Yes, exactly. My apologies to Douglas Murray and anybody who's found anything I've said remotely offensive. Sorry, not sorry. 13th of February 1945. 45, you see. So yes, it really was incredibly late in the day, but it's very, very easy to talk in hindsight, isn't it? Yes. It really is. Yeah. It's like, I remember having a discussion with an Israeli about Churchill being a warmonger. And I thought, oh, God, again. And this is really before I really got into Churchill. And he said that he had the ability to bomb Auschwitz. There were pictures from the RAF of Monowitz, and you could see lines of Hungarian Jews on their way to the crematorium, into the gas chambers. Why didn't you bomb it? He was responsible for allowing that place to stay open. And my point was, well, if he had bombed it, you'd now be saying to me, he murdered the only people who could have bore witness. Yeah. You see, so you're between a rock and a hard place, and you have to make the decision. When he found out about Auschwitz, he said, get everything you can. It's a fact. It's a document. I've seen the document. It's at Churchill Archives in Churchill College, Cambridge. Get everything you can out of the RAF for this. Invoke me if necessary. It's like, do something about it. To Anthony Eden, the Foreign Secretary, who decided we have to, if we bomb the rail tracks, they will be repaired in days, and the slaughter will continue, It's very, very difficult to do that when you're in the middle of a war, and fighting for survival and, being starved yourself by the Battle of the Atlantic, etc., etc. All these things. It's almost like we can't have enough information. We can't have enough history. Suddenly you have to have a perspective on it, somehow, in some way. love of country, you know, of the Vaterland. They were all saying, you know, it's for Germany, for Germany. They couldn't have agreed with that, could they? Really?
Why do you think not?
Well, again, I come back to the arguments of looking the other way and becoming responsible. Mm-hmm. They saw all that. They enabled all that to happen. You know, even if you were disgusted by it, you couldn't say anything.
Do you think, how much of a bearing, given the level of abject poverty that was in play before the Nazi regime came into play, how much of that do you think had a sort of a bearing on the sort of not paying attention or being...
Huge.
So,
huge.
Yeah.
Clemenceau, wasn't it, who said that the Treaty of Versailles was an armistice for 20 years. It was almost to the day. Mm. He was right. You know, absolutely. And of course, all the parties, the Communist Party as well, talked about that, about redressing the grievances of Versailles and building upon that, make Germany great again. What's that? The McGurr movement, you know, and suddenly marching through the streets, you know, wir treten das Pflaster marschierengestellt Welt, all that, which is appalling German, but, you know, marching together and comrades and, you know, and who do we blame? Well, who have we always blamed? You know, again, there's nothing different to Ricky Gervais. I blame this. We know who Mel blames. You know, yeah. It's a wonderful joke, but it's true.
Yeah.
You know, let's blame the great scapegoats again.
Yeah, yeah, the ever consistent scapegoats of history.
Look how well they've done. You know, Karl Marx was a Jew. Do you know by the interesting fact that the Communist Manifesto was written at my school?
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Engels was with Chetham's School of Music in Manchester. Chetham's Library is the oldest free library in Europe. And Engels was a Mancunian businessman, and he used to meet Marx. They used to go to Chetham's Library, you know, and that's where it was written.
That's very
So it's the seat of communism.
Yeah.
You'd have to wipe the seat, you know. Yeah. It's a great experiment.
Maybe throw the seat away.
Well, he caused a lot of problems, didn't he, communism? Yes. I mean, that's not really a success, was it? I mean, they killed more than Hitler. Stalin killed more than Hitler.
Communism, actually, the regime in the USSR and the extensions of it in various other countries, I think that actually goes under the radar for a lot of people of just how awful that was. Mm. I looked into... I can't remember where it was called. Nazinski. Did I ever tell you about Nazinski?
No.
Stalin's Cannibal Island.
Cannibal Island?
Yeah.
Nazinski,
yeah. This is you can consider this story and this this event within history as a sort of vehicle for much of the atrocity that went on in the communist regime. A lot of cannibalism and just general starvation was at play, but this is sort of a metaphorical spearhead for this. Nazinski was an island that the Russian soldiers went through the land of Russia and rounded up anyone who was essentially above a certain wage bracket. So the more sort of the better off farmers basically were rounded up and were taken to...
Or from Ukraine.
From Ukraine. Yeah. Ukraine and Russia, yeah, you're right. And they were taken to... I can't remember where the place within Russia was that they were then taken from there to Nazinski, but they were rounded up thousands of people and brought them to a place within Russia that I cannot remember the name for the life of me. From this point, the intention was that these thousands of people that they essentially wanted to just sort of wipe off the grid because of the fact that they were above a wage bracket, and as a result they could have had more bearing on essentially what was going on in the country. They were rounded up and they were brought into this state, And from there, the place that they were had nowhere to put these people. They didn't know what to do with them. They didn't know that they were due to be having them. So the officials that were in charge of these people thought, understandably, we cannot send these people back to where they came from, about 10 hours away. We can't send them back, because if we do, then we might have some serious problems from a certain Joseph Stalin. I don't think many people would go against.
Djugashvili.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think many people would be going against him, and these people didn't. So, as a result of this, not having the facilities to take care of them, they sent them up the river, about another 10 hours away, to a very, very small island called Nazinski. Now, on Nazinski...
To the Gulag Archipelago.
I don't know.
No?
I don't know. And on this island, you had these people brought into... those that survived the journey, I must add, this was 10 hours in the freezing temperatures of Siberia.
It is Gulag,
yeah.
Gulag Archipelago is a Solzhenitsyn book.
Yeah.
The story was sent there.
That would be it, in which case. Yes, and the temperatures that killed many people on the journey up there, those that did survive were put on to this
minus 30,
desolate,
minus 40, like Stalingrad.
Yeah, this desolate island. On the island, you had some very, to the point of what we were saying earlier, wicked guards who took pride in their job, who basically left these people on the island and just left them there. The idea with these people was, we shall leave them there, and over a period of time they'll all die. And essentially that was what happened. You had every single night hundreds of people would die from the temperatures. Those that survived became ever more cannibalistic because they needed food. The food that they were given, actually, this is very depraved in intrigue. The food they were given initially was something like 3 loaves of bread per 40 people. It was something absurdly small amount. And over about 2 days worth of provisions, the guards decided that they couldn't be bothered to make the bread. They were given the ingredients to create these bread loaves to give to the people. They decided that they couldn't be bothered to do that anymore, so they just gave them the flour. And they shared the flour between hundreds of people. And obviously, as you can imagine, not a lot of those people actually got that food. And as a result, very quickly, people started to cannibalise. So people would... essentially, Nazinski became a hunting ground between the people. And those that were stronger and fitter killed those that weren't. There's some very awful scenes of that are in play. And, yeah, I think there's... I mean, the amount of people that survived Nazinski is it's a minute amount. There's not very many people came out of it, as you can understand.
But there were some.
There were some, but essentially, after the first batch of people that were put onto the island were either killed by their allies, ironically. When they brought more people in, because there were more people that needed to be shipped, the amount of food that was given out to the group didn't actually change. So you had twice as many people vying for the same amount of resource, which only exacerbated that cannibalism. And I think the reason as to why I wanted to bring that into play is basically just to make the point of how we are very in touch with the horrors of the Nazi regime, but the Nazi regime didn't do that. Now, I don't know if you could quantify that as a point for them versus the Soviet Union, but
well, no, I mean it's
lesser known knowledge.
It's every country on earth has it's a fundamental part of human nature. You know, man's inhumanity to man, and yes, I mean, like I say, I was fascinated by this inconceivable thing that I still can't really comprehend and understand. But there's many examples of it. I mean, in this country, the Civil War, brother against brother, and that sort of thing, and atrocities were committed. It's what do you put it down to? Human weakness, the need to survive, the will to survive, all that. You know, it's like we were talking before about. I mentioned Richard Glaser from Treblinka and Samuel Willenberg. These men were extraordinary. It's almost like when you saw them speak, you understood how they could survive such horror. There's a strength in them. There's a will in them that they were going to, no matter what, survive and bear witness. But I mean, in such an arbitrary thing, it could never be relied upon. But you kind of believe it. And that man, after all he'd been through, Richard Gaza, his wife died, and he opened the windows and threw himself out of his apartment. He couldn't take any more pain in life, and he just ended it. It was the simplest thing. He'd seen death so closely, he wasn't afraid of it. You know, he just opened the windows, out he went. It all comes down to the whole lot, the whole story, the whole conversation comes down to wanting to have dominion over other people, you know, wanting to be in charge of them, wanting to be in control of them, wanting to be the best of this or that, you know, and that is fundamentally human nature. That's how it will be, and you will disagree with them. And as an Englishman, looking at Hitler, and I go, how the hell did you follow that? You know, but then he's delivering you Belgium and an army and the Netherlands, France. He's invaded Poland. He's taken over this pride. You know, and you're suddenly going, Sieg Heil, you know.
Have you listened to the English translations of Hitler's speeches?
I have, yeah, some of them. I'm not an avid. I'm not an avid follower.
It's not one of your spare time joys.
No, I've read Mein Kampf, and it's incredibly dull.
Is it?
Oh yes, I mean.
So a dull writer as much as a poor artist.
He wasn't as good as a painter as Winston, and he certainly wasn't as good a writer as Winston. You know, Winston wrote more than Shakespeare and Dickens combined.
I went into, there's a bookshop in Rochester. It's the biggest second-hand bookshop in the world.
Oh, really?
And I went into there, and the first thing that I saw was an entire bookshelf of Winston Churchill's writings.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very and big books as well. These are not small.
Well, he was an incredible writer, and he owed a lot. He's very poor education, really. Kept getting told off and put back. But he said, but I learned how to construct an English sentence, which is a noble thing, and all that. And I love his writing. It's very arcane. But Marlborough, for example, his great tome on his ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough, and Blenheim and all that, it's beautifully written, very much in the vein of Macaulay, History of Britain, or Gibbon, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He's a great, great writer, you know, and his books are still being published to this day, you know. He's an extraordinary man, really extraordinary. And then he produced 500 canvases because painting took him away from his depression and his melancholy, what he called his black dog. You know, he's an incredible. You can't keep him down.
No, you can't. A character of that magnitude is almost impossible, almost impervious to that form of oppression, because it's such.
But a character like that also has his detractors. You know, absolutely.
And where do you think those lie?
How do you mean?
What do you think those detractors are?
Well, the people that go on constantly about Dresden or Blenheim and all that, trying to lampoon a national hero, that sort of thing. Yeah,
I'm going to bring this back to what we were saying about Douglas Murray. This is the point. A real point of irritation for me is this idea that people have of essentially just jumping on the bandwagon of, let's take the obvious victim or the obvious righteous victor, and let's find a way to make them the enemy. Let's find a way to do something that paints them as though the Israel question is a wonderful example.
It comes back to the age-old issue, doesn't it? I mean, could you imagine? Well, think of 9/11 in the case of America and what that led to. Deaths of over 1 million people. Innocents living under a dictatorship. Can you imagine any country on earth having 1,300 people massacred by a neighbouring state and having hostages taken by that same proscribed terrorist organisation? Can you imagine any country on earth, the response to it? And look at the response to what Israel did.
Yeah,
Israel is that, and they're surrounded by Muslim countries, which is huge. It's that. And they're surrounded by those countries, all of whom they've been at war with, all of whom they've defeated.
I'm going to be specifically or intentionally polemic just for the sake of the point. Israel's firepower.
I think we've largely stuck to polemics.
Yeah.
I don't think we've been too controversial.
No, I think
because we can't be.
Well.
Because we can't be.
But I have heard a lot of people make that point, and there is truth to the fact that the IDF is quite a prevalent military force. I mean, the 6-Day War is the proof of it were needed of this.
Yes, they had loudspeakers, and they thought it was a much bigger army than it was. All stories like that.
I mean, I know they've moved.
A professional force, and very proud. Have you known any army in history who gives advanced warnings of attacks?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point. And on the other side of that, there was something I did like.
Hello, this is Adolf Hitler. I'm going to be invading you in half an hour.
Yeah, get out.
No, you don't have that.
No, that's right. There was something Douglas Murray said on this that I thought is a really strong argument against this sort of... I'm sure you've heard people say that Israel have committed a genocide in Palestine.
Genocide.
Yeah, genocide, but the population has increased in between these two times.
Well, I wouldn't particularly trust the numbers of the Hamas health ministry.
Yeah.
Particularly.
I don't think they have a wonderful bearing on what health is.
I really don't. When I've seen footage of their members in action.
Mm.
Yeah, I couldn't necessarily do that. But I mean, it's being suppressed, but recent reports from Gaza suggest that there is a growing movement of anti-Hamas.
You've seen it. There are protests on the street.
I know, but you know how that's going to be dealt with. If they use children as human shields, I don't think they're going to be,
Oh, there's a grave concern of mine that I hope that there were enough people doing that for the sort of... If 10 people do that, all 10 of those people will be dead very quickly. I don't actually know how...
Well, life is cheap there, you see.
Yeah, it is. Life is essentially meaningless.
That's what it comes down to. Hatred. This is where hatred leads us. I mean, you could make the case in Ukraine and Russia that they're fighting a civil war, and it is very, very tragic. And it seemed reported that it was somehow strange that President Trump turned around and said, "Stop this war. Stop killing 5,000 of each other's troops a week, these young men being butchered." I think he has rather a good point there. I mean, it's a total stalemate. It's lunacy to have started it in the first place, but Putin did say what he was going to do, and then we were all shocked when he did it. Yeah.
Yeah, I trust him for his word.
Yes, well, I mean, we have the same kind of problem. Crimea is suddenly the Rhineland. The rest of Ukraine is suddenly the Sudetenland. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Russia. We know how this goes. We know where this leads. Have they been effective in warding it off? Have they buggery? And they're all what our Prime Minister Starmer saying, well, we'll send our soldiers. We've hardly got an army left. But what to do what? To get killed in a foreign field? It doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah. It does relate to that kind of age-old jingoism, I'm sure. But it's somehow hollow, and I don't trust it. But something has to be done. Zelensky's a remarkable character. He's Jewish.
Is he?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And rather good comedian. Back in the day, his old job. But he's shown immense Churchillian courage, I would say. I think he made a mistake at the White House, very much.
Why?
Oh. Well, I don't think you go to somebody's house and insult them. And,
what did he say that was insulting?
Well, how much has America given?
Let's, just for the sake, before I let you run with this,
Please don't let me run with this.
I'm letting you run with it. I'm going to tee you up well. Make the point, you made a very interesting point to me that I think a lot of people, this will fly well under their radars, of the fact that the footage that we saw come out of the White House was 5 minutes long and the interview itself was more like 45 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I watched it all.
Yeah.
And my first reaction, because of course I've been programmed by the mainstream media and everything, the first thing I thought was, oh, Trump's got this wrong. How dare you treat him like this? Because he has enormous respect from people all over the world in what he's doing. But I hadn't thought of the alternative. And I watched it, and he was supposed to be signing the contract, which he has signed now, about the minerals. And I suddenly thought, well, you're a bit, you're demanding something that hasn't been agreed. He's trying a fast one. And trying to pull a fast one with a man who is, whether you like him or not, known for his art of the deal, you see. And also a bit of a maverick. So it wasn't going to end well, but you got the 5 minutes and it looked like Trump was bullying him. Whereas in actual fact, the 45 minutes shows that it could have been seen the other way around. Absolutely. Just a little different perspective on something, and suddenly the narrative changes. Now, you want weapons. You want to defeat Russia. You're not going to defeat Russia. It's too big. Look, Hitler took 4 million of their soldiers prisoner of war, and killed most of them, starved them to death, rather like you were talking. That the Russians could do to their own people. If the Russians retreated, the Russians shot them. The Russians at Stalingrad. If you retreated because the Germans were just butchering you, you were going to be butchered by your own side. Things like that.
The Russians didn't have enough guns to actually.
Yes, that's right. They had to pass on a rifle. Yeah.
Yeah, they would pick up the rifle of the man in front of them that had died.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Until much later, until they started, bringing the Siberian troops over, and that's what happened with Stalingrad and everything. A miracle how they survived that. But Hitler totally underestimated them. So we need to learn that lesson. They have so many people, one of the most populous nations in the world. So they're not going to win. I'm surprised how spectacularly they've lost, in the sense that, he wanted to take over the country in 3 weeks. 3 days, wasn't it? To get to Kiev in 3 days. Came very close, committed a war crime. And, of course, it took Hitler about 2 weeks to overrun Ukraine.
3 years now.
Yeah. And it's awful, and people are being slaughtered. So what's the point of it? What is the point?
What's the opposition like? What's the...
What, to Putin? I've got to be very careful. I don't want to be poisoned.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, watch your door handles.
Well, quite. Yes. In this country, that was all.
Yeah.
That was, look how we dealt with that.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't come into our country and do that. Oh, my God.
Yes. Yeah.
But the sanctions, they must hit Russia and everything, and Trump could introduce far more sanctions. He's warned about that. But something's got to be done to stop it, It's a longer history in the case of Israel and Palestine, or Hamas. It's a much, much older history, But yes, I that changed my mind, my perspective on it, seeing the whole lot and rather the bit that we were fed and the narrative that was taken. Journalism, in my memory, used to be rather careful, rather less biased than it is now. And it strikes me as being incredibly biased now. That seems to be a lost art, depending on your perspective.
Certainly. Well, unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to draw it out here.
Oh right, how long have we done?
We've done about 2.5 hours.
You're kidding me.
I'm pretty sure we're erring on the side of it, but the recording has just ended, so this part isn't. I'm gonna have to sync it at the end. It won't have the clean, crisp audio, which is my bearing to say I think it's time to round it out.
No problem.
Yeah.
At all.
But for the sake of this point, I think we've manoeuvred our way through a number of contentious and very interesting topics.
Yeah.
And I think it sets us up nicely for, if you would be so inclined, a round two at some point.
Oh, sure.
Because I think there's a lot here that we can dive into.
Yeah, we got into. I like that very much. We kind of came to new conclusions about that phrase, banality of evil.
Yeah.
And how it serves as a dual purpose. Yeah. That the perpetrators can make it so banal, but to us it's never that. That was fascinating. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that really on that level. I just couldn't see evil as that, but it's very possible.
Well, this is the importance of having conversations about these things. This is what you come to.
It's true, and I hope I kind of like, made sure that it's just us chatting. It's not.
Yeah, that's the idea.
It's not making any kind of claims to anything. Not making any claims to even opinion.
Yeah,
really, very much.
Well, I'd like to think that if Douglas Murray was to be watching this, that he would be reasonably content with the safeguarding at play.
Well, it struck me that talking about him how brave he is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He really is incredibly brave.
Yes, not many people to choose to go to the front lines of the two most significant conflicts. Well, besides maybe some.
Has he been to Ukraine?
Yeah.
He's done that as well.
Yeah. Consistently.
Yeah, well, that's the best way to report on history. I must get that new book of his.
On democracies and death cults.
Yes, I can imagine what the death cult is. Is it?
Yeah.
Of course it is. I have to ask.
Yes.
I think,
no, of course it is. Well, Christian, I have to say I always enjoy your company. I think
I feel quite knackered now. Actually,
well, it does that. Yeah, I shall load off after this. But no, I find your company always interesting. I find you as warm company as you are intriguing company. And
well,
so I really thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I mean, it was kind of quite fascinating. But it's a shame, isn't it, that there is always that thought at the back of the head. We want to be very careful. We kind of like we came to the minefield several times.
Yeah, we've identified the mine and just walked around it.
Yeah. That was quite skillful, really. I should hope, which is not bad at all, is it? Really.
Well, potentially next time we might see if we can kick the mines.
Well,
yeah. Poke the proverbial bear.
It is fascinating. I don't know how that works at all as a kind of how it works. It'd be quite interesting to see. Perhaps I'd better check it before you put it out.
What, this one?
Yeah.
I mean, you're welcome to, but I don't think there's going to be. I honestly don't think that there's.
It's quite funny. Keep it. You start self-censoring yourself, then it.
Well,
makes it a mute point, doesn't it?
But you know what? That is a good point. That actually, a lot of the time, it's sort of nice little. I'm going to tie this bow very nicely on the conversation. It's not the hand that's pulling the strings. It's the strings themselves. In the sense that it's not someone saying you can't say that, it's you saying I don't know if I can say that.